Executive versus Judiciary, the final verdict. Let me call on stage consulting editor Rajdeep Sardesai to moderate the session. We have a panelist of some very distinguished guests. I'm going to call each one of them one by one. Put your hands together as I invite on stage former Solicitor General of India, Harish Salve. Senior lawyer and former Union Minister of Law and Justice, Kapil Sibal. Mr. Arghya Sengupta, Research Director, Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. Justice BN Sri Krishna, former judge to the Supreme Court of India. And while the session, lady, is going on, I would also like just to inform you that behind me, we're going to be playing some fascinating archival photographs that will give you a sense of just how India today not only chronicles history, but also makes headlines at the same time. So don't forget to see some of those images behind me. Gentlemen, a warm welcome. Thank you so much. Rajdeep, over to you.
Thank you very much, Avantika. One of the vexed relationships of our times that perhaps we don't look at often enough, but in a sense now really affects the core of our institutional structure and the balance of power within our institutions is the relationship between the judiciary and the executive. I have four very fine legal minds with me. Harish Salve, former Solicitor General of the country and perhaps the country's best paid lawyer, although the man next to him might dispute that. Kapil Sibal is making up for lost time in the years that he was in the UPA government and has finally realized that perhaps there is life beyond the Congress party. He's therefore now taking up more cases perhaps than any other lawyer in the country and is therefore one of the country's finest legal minds. If you're in trouble, you go to one of these two gentlemen, you'll be fine. Next to them is a young man who I have enormous respect for because Arghya Sengupta is a DPhil at Oxford, a Rhodes Scholar, who's come back and has set up the Vidhi Legal Research Center, and they are doing some wonderful work in the area of legal policy and legislation. And next to them is Justice BN Sri Krishna, who perhaps deserves to be seen as one of the most distinguished judges this country has produced, and extremely unfortunate not to have been a Chief Justice of this country. And in this very city, he spent 4 of his best years delivering the Sri Krishna Commission judgment, which sadly was then thrown by the next Maharashtra government into the Arabian Sea. So next time when someone tells you about why we don't get justice for major cases of crime, of mass crime like riots, 900 people died in this very city, and the judgment and the report of Justice Sri Krishna, rather than being acted upon, was thrown by the government of the day into the Arabian Sea. We have very strong views on that because I had appeared before his commission, but we can discuss that on another day at another time. My focus, though, is on that judiciary-executive relationship. I'm going to start, gentlemen, by throwing three figures at you, and I want you to respond to the solution you have to the problem we all face of judicial delay first. In this country, 2.28 crore odd cases are pending in the lower courts, 40 lakhs in the High Court, and 68,000 in the Supreme Court. Starting with you, Mr. Salve, give me your prescription to end this problem of judicial delays that is threatening and undermining our entire judicial system.
See, for a lawyer, the answer is almost a no-brainer. You need more judges. Look at the one statistic you didn't throw, is the judge population ratio. Factor into that the litigiousness of the government of India, who in current times believes anything which is contentious should be decided by the courts, who wants to take a decision and face CBI. So in a scenario like this, countries like US have 100 plus per million. Even countries like UK, which have much better governed and therefore much smaller countries, easier to govern, much lesser litigation, they have 60, 70. We have a sanctioned strength, I think, of close to 30. But I think the actual strength is close to 10 or below. Now, with 9 or 10 judges per million, and we have done this before, we did this exercise. There are studies done on this. If you give a judge a case a day, he will dispose it off. If you give him 3 cases, he'll dispose of 1.5. If you give him 10 cases, he knows you're not serious about his work. He'll adjourn all 10 and go home. And that's what is going on in India.
You know, the fact is, Kapil Sibal, Justice Thakur, former Chief Justice, said Law Commission had recommended increase the number of judges from 10 judges per 10 lakh people to 50. Well, and even that hasn't happened.
Well, that's the norm if you really look at...
So what's the solution?
Well, I'm just mentioning this. That's the norm. For every million people, you have at least a minimum of 50 judges.
Yes.
And the ratio here is 13, 1-3.
That's right.
So before every judge in the lower court, there are at least 90 matters listed on any given day. 90 matters. He cannot do them. It's just not possible. So there's an issue of numbers. But then there's an issue of quality. Where do you find those 50 judges per million people? The state governments have to recruit them because the central government has no power to recruit them. The state governments will not recruit them. That's not their priority. So the ratio will not be maintained ever.
It's also because the best lawyers in the country, whether it's Mr. Sibal or Mr. Salve, will never become a judge.
No, one second.
Because the salaries of Indian judges will never match that of a senior lawyer.
No. To become a judge in the lower court, you have to appear for the exam. So that's not an issue there. But let me tell you the most serious problem. It's not the 3 crore cases. It's the millions of people who can't access courts. That's the real issue. In this country, millions cannot access courts. You're only talking about numbers of people who have accessed courts. What about those who can't access courts? They don't have the wherewithal to go to court. That's a far more serious problem.
Your solution. Let's look at the solution. We know the problem. What's the solution, Arghya Sengupta?
Well, actually, I think part of the reason is that we don't know the problem entirely, because I think the judge population ratio is undoubtedly miserable. But I don't think that just increasing the number of judges will solve our problem. We do need to increase the number of judges, but it won't solve the problem. I'll just go back a little bit. As in when I was growing up, and one of the first Bollywood films that I saw was Sunny Deol in Damini saying, Tariq pe Tariq pe Tariq. And I think today, 23 years down the line, most ordinary litigants, when they go to court, for the first 5 dates, all that they get is still, after 25 years, a Tariq. So I think, apart from the judge population ratio, the big problem that hurts our judicial system is the culture of adjournments. The President was here yesterday and said that disruptions in Parliament is a disease. I think adjournments in the courts of law are also an important disease, and I think it has to be treated like one.
But those adjournments, and I'm sorry to be maybe sounding facile for a moment, those adjournments in a way, Mr. Salve and Mr. Sibal, suit lawyers like you.
Absolutely. Spot on.
Right. Okay, good.
And let me tell you,
yes,
I now practice in 2 jurisdictions.
Yes.
And my conviction is, Indian lawyers overcharge and underdeliver. We don't take work seriously. And how do we take work seriously? Rajdeep, you tell me I have a case to argue in Supreme Court 2 weeks from now. I will prepare it threadbare. I will go ready. And the judge will say, I will not take your case today. I'm hearing some other case. The whole system is creaking. It's about to fall flat on its face if it hasn't already. So nobody takes it seriously. You go and the case reaches when you're not prepared. When you're prepared, the case doesn't reach. So you say, okay, we will take it all in our stride. All of us have to get our act together. Starting with us. All of us have to get our act together.
It's nice when senior lawyers come and say this. It's a way of self-flagellation. You're almost sounding like a journalist when you say that. But Justice Sri Krishna, I went 2 weeks ago to Hyderabad, a 12-year-old criminal defamation case in a lower court. And we found that the judge wasn't present. Now we've got a date 6 months from now. What am I to do? And what is any average litigant to do in this country? Is the problem with the judges? Is the problem with the lawyers? Is it just a systemic problem that we are faced with?
Rajdeep, I'm the only one who has spent a lot of time as a judge, apart from my previous avatar as a counsel. I have experience of both. Let me tell you something. All 3 are the factors. 1, judges themselves are not prepared.
Are not prepared?
Not prepared. Because why? He says in any way, lawyer will ask for an adjournment. Lawyer is not prepared. Why he thinks the judge is not going to be prepared? The client is the one who is going to pay for all this dilly-dallying. Number two, the judge is overloaded because the judges are not enough in this country. I'll give you an example. There was a delegation of American Supreme Court judges and federal judges who came when I was a judge of the Bombay High Court. They came to teach us judicial management. This lady, judge of the Supreme Court, I will not name her, was sitting next to me at the round table. And I asked her casually and said, ma'am, how many cases do you dispose of in the Supreme Court of the United States? She said, in a bad year, 150. I said, very good. How many do you actually hear in the Supreme Court, in the court? She said, maybe 10, 15 in a bad year. I said, madam, do you know that I write judgments in 2,000 cases throughout the year? She just said, oh my God, how do you survive? I said, I've survived. It's a great credit to me. That is how I survived in 17 years of my judicial career. I used to have roughly 100 matters of SLP on every Monday and every Friday. How did I work? I worked because I had no option. I never saw my wife and children. I only saw my office, my stacks of papers, and my secretary's face. If that is how a judge used to work, surely the quality of judgments are not going to be very better.
But is there a decline in the quality of judges? Do you concede that, a marked decline in the quality of judges?
Well, I was a bad judge, I'll concede that.
No one is going to charge you with contempt. So you can be fine in saying that there is a marked decline in the quality of judges.
Rajdeep, you're talking to one of the finest intellects I have seen in my 40 years at the Supreme Court. But let me tell you...
But are there all too few? Are there all too few?
Let me tell you, for one Justice Sri Krishna, there are 25 others. He just mentioned how much work he did. See the quality of judgments you get from other jurisdictions. If he had more time to write his judgments, can you imagine what he would have produced? He would have produced jurisprudence which would have made the country proud.
Which is where I want to come to this point of quality of judges. Just a minute, sir.
Just one second,
Yes.
1 second. You see, we also shouldn't blame the judges. On any given Monday or Friday, there are 60 matters listed before a bench in the Supreme Court. Nobody can actually read those 60 matters. Many of them run into thousands of pages. Now, how does a judge come prepared for his brief? It's impossible. How does a lawyer come prepared for his brief?
Mr. Sibal will vouch that I was never unprepared.
I'm not talking about you. I mean, sir, let's not talk about exceptions.
No,
you were an exception.
But the problem, Mr. Sibal, is not so much at the Supreme Court as much as it is in the lower court, as it is in the high court.
Look, as he said about tariq pe tariq pe tariq, if a judge is faced with 90 cases on his board, what can he do? You don't blame the judge for tariq pe tariq pe tariq. No, see, we have to look at things from his point of view also. How does he do 90 cases in a day?
Now, can I come though to the next issue, which is the quality of judges, the kind of people who are becoming judges, and then I'll come to this entire question of who should appoint a judge. Do you concede that the quality of judges has markedly declined in the last 10, 20 years? The kind of people, particularly in the lower courts, who are judges, shouldn't really be judges?
Honest answer, yes.
Honest, simple answer, yes, Mr. Sibal?
Remember, these people get into the judiciary through a written examination. There's a subordinate judicial services examination. That's how they become judges.
But Adip, I want to add one thing.
Yes.
I was once directed, this is 20 years back, Jaitley and I were directed by the Supreme Court to go and have a look at the facilities in Tisazari. They were having a problem with the government of the day who was refusing to give certain accommodation to the judges. And you know, the executive government of Delhi used to at least function from Tisazari as the judges. If you go there, the chaprasi of the executive magistrate has a better room than the judge who's sitting and hearing murder trials. That is how we treat our judges. You treat them as though they are a superfluity. That's the quality of justice they are going to get, and that's as much work a human being can put in. Tell me how many of us will refuse to vote for a political party if it does not promise you judicial reform? Put a hand on our hearts. How many of us who have a case don't go and tell our lawyer, abhi adjourn kara deo? So it's a problem in Indian society. We don't take justice delivery seriously.
What's the solution, Arghya?
Well, I think there is no easy solution in 1 minute, as in I think that it's a complex problem, but I think the issue really is that we need to think of three things. The first is that we really need to, as Mr. Salve and Mr. Sibal have said, both increase the numbers of judges as well as increase the salaries of judges and increase the retirement age of judges. I think all these three need to be increased so as to attract good quality talent. Number two, and I think this is critical, is that we really need to improve the level of technology that we use in courtrooms. As in, there are fine courts across the world which are not just paperless, but they use technology in order to understand where cases are stuck, how we can move cases forward. And I think there are a number of interventions that technology can make. I'll give you one example of that, is that there are systems in the world where there are unique identification numbers, which is a project that India is doing for everybody, so why not for lawyers? As in that every lawyer has, and so a lawyer who has that unique ID is not given two cases at the same time, thereby obviating one adjournment that can
You'll
be
put Sibal and Salve out of business if you say they can't do two cases at the same time.
No, I think the point simply is that the fact is there's nothing that can put Mr. Sibal and Salve out of business.
That apart.
Well, let me tell you, and I'm sure Kapil doesn't disagree, if fixing the system can be achieved by putting two of us out of business,
No problem.
we deserve it.
You'd be ready for a system where a lawyer takes up only one case at a time?
Absolutely.
6 months a year I do that, Rajdeep.
Absolutely.
6 months.
You're an exception.
I'm telling you, the satisfaction you get of detailing a case, of getting into its nuances, and of working it threadbare is a completely different intellectual satisfaction. And believe me, today with the kind of growth you see in corporate India, you earn exactly the same amount of money. So that's not an issue.
So it's not about
clients,
the money.
no, clients don't mind. Clients say, I'm happy to pay you your day's fee if you promise to sit down in a room and read my papers.
It's not a problem at all. Only thing is Harish will increase his fees and so will I.
Okay. And Justice Sri Krishna, who should appoint judges, particularly to the higher, who should appoint judges, particularly to the higher judiciary, which is now a vexed issue? We now have the judges making it very clear through the collegium system, they have the right. You now have a memorandum of procedure which the government has come in place, where the government says if there are concerns of national security, then we can veto judges appointed by the collegium system. Who should decide who should become a judge? The executive or the judiciary, which is a non-transparent club according to many?
All this debate is arisen because the executive did not follow the original convention. What was the original convention? There was no collegium, no nothing. I'm talking the good old days, before all the three judges' cases were heard, and before the advent of the so-called emergency and all that. What is the system? The Chief Justice was the one who recommended to the President of India. And the President said, all right, unless there is an extraordinary reason, he would appoint. If you look at the first few appointments, that was what was being done. When did it change? It all changed when the executive became all-powerful. Then when it changed, the pendulum swung to the other side. Now, in order to bring back the pendulum to the center, it was pulled to the other side. So we are on the other side now. Now it is necessary to bring it back to the center. Will everybody now swear on the Constitution and say, yes, sir, let's go back to the original system. Let the Chief Justice of India make a recommendation. The executive will consider it without any hesitation, unless there is an extraordinary reason which will point out to the Chief Justice and leave it to his discretion. If everybody agrees, then it can go back to the President. What happened during the emergency? What happened to all the judges who were thrown out like football is what led to this collegium system.
So who should do it? Who should do it? Given that it is a non-transparent system, we've had Chief Justices in recent times, sir, with due regard, who have appointed judges not on the basis of merit, but because of caste loyalties. I'm using the word advisedly, caste loyalties, political loyalties, and very little to do with the quality of judges.
So is it with political executive. People are not appointed on merits. Are you telling me all ministers are on merits? Maybe Kapil Sibal was an exception. Are they appointed on political expediency, caste, loyalty? Of course, yes. So what is wrong? If he did it, I grant you it is not the one. I am not suggesting that the Supreme Court should be packed with such people. But don't come out with this argument which makes no sense to me. If the country is governed by people like this, the judges will be no exception. Therefore, let's go back to the original system and talk in terms of political, talk in terms of constitutional conventions being followed. If the conventions are not followed, you have this extraordinary remedy of having to swallow the bitter pill.
So we are all, in a sense, then becoming collaborators in the decline of an institution.
No, I'm suggesting go back to the original convention. Let everybody put his hand on his heart and say, I'll swear by the constitutional convention. We don't want collegium, we don't want anything. Let the Chief Justice, as contemplated by the Constitution, recommend and let the President appoint.
But sir, if I may say, if you've seen the experience of previous appointments of Chief Justices, and if you really look at all the Supreme Court judges that have been appointed, barring a few exceptions, you will find it somebody's Bhatija, somebody's junior, somebody's this, somebody's that. So then how, unless men of integrity decide to appoint judges on an objective basis, no matter what system you have, it will fail.
Now, what would you prefer? Would you prefer that the political class becomes part of this process?
I think
What's your view?
We can't trust the political class and we can't trust the collegium. We'll have to find something different.
No, you've been both a politician and a lawyer.
The English tradition of a judicial commission with a vast variety of people on the commission to suggest
So you don't
names.
trust politicians to appoint judges?
I don't trust politicians and I don't trust the collegium either.
Rajdeep, these problems have to be solved going forward. Law ministers appointed Krishnayars, Bhagwatis, they appointed Gajendra Gadkars, they appointed Shahs, some of the finest who have ever adorned our bench. Collegiums have appointed Karnans. You've had problems on both sides.
Collegiums have appointed?
Justice Karnan hangs. It speaks for itself. I'm not saying all their appointments are bad. We have to find a solution. And the solution lies in creating an institution which is neither the executive nor the collegium. And the process has to be made transparent. You know, let me give you a slightly different example. Forget a judge to become a senior counsel. In UK, you have to fill a 200-page form to be a QC. You are interviewed by a panel of 3, which includes one lay person. And that person grills you on, what have you done to bring diversity? Now, that is how selections are done. Here, Justice Sri Krishna will tell you how senior counsel are appointed by the judges. His face says it all. Take it.
How are they appointed?
It's
Voting.
Some people are appointed because they know the law. Some people are appointed because they know the judges. Now,
no, one gentleman came to the Chief Justice of Bombay High Court and said, I am being appointed as advocate attorney, ASG from Monday. Can you make me senior counsel today? The Chief Justice told, slapped him out of the court.
So you have to lobby. In order to become a senior counsel, you have to lobby with the judges.
correct. So things
That's
have,
where it is.
but so let's raise it to the next level, appointment of judges. I'm sorry, I sharply disagree with the perception that the judicial independence can be preserved only if judges appoint judges. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the judgment of the NJSC.
So you don't agree with the NJSC judgment?
No, and
when there was a National Judicial Appointments Commission, which the Parliament, in a sense, legislated in 2014, the judges got together. The judges got together and ganged up.
They took a view which I don't agree with. Now, as a journalist, you can say ganged up. I say I'm not convinced by the intellectual logic of that judgment. And my personal feeling was the Constitution created a system which ran. They had a right to revisit it in 1980, early 80s, when the first judge's case came. They didn't want to. They didn't find it necessary. Forget the legal logic. Let's come to hard reality. By 1991, things had sunk to a point where we all fought that you can't have the executive appointing judges. By 2015, we had reached a point by a lot of right-meaning lawyers said, you cannot have judges appointing judges. The world has moved on. In a monarchy like England, you have now a whole process of a judicial panel. You have the Australian model, or you can have the American model, or you can have an amalgam of all those. Have people like Arghya and his friends sit and write a report on how judicial independence can be achieved, and let's go forward.
What's the prescription for judicial independence?
See, I think the key question, more than who appoints, is what is the process that's followed for appointment. Because the fact is that the Judicial Appointments Commission, which was first suggested by the UPA government and then in a very similar fashion by the NDA government, was a reform that was sensible. It was a reform that protected the independence of the judiciary, but which the judges in their wisdom decided was unconstitutional. I agree entirely with Mr. Salve that it's a problem. But I think that the judgment was unconvincing. But I think the issue really is one of how can we get transparency and accountability in the process. Currently, judicial independence is like a sword, as in it's used to stop any kind of reform in the judiciary. But what we need is a balance of independence and accountability that comes from transparency. And one last point is that the larger picture is one where we think that a frosty relationship between the executive and the judiciary is not entirely a bad thing. You want a frosty relationship between the executive and the judiciary because this is the separation of power scheme in the constitution. These are the checks and balances that we need. So while I disagree entirely with the NJAC judgment, I think my graver problems are with judgments like which mandate that I have to stand up for the national anthem before every movie plays, which is not a judicial function, and which seems to me that the judges are suddenly speaking the language that you would expect a politician.
Look at it. There are judgments which now say that you can't serve liquor on highways. You can't serve liquor on highways. That in the BCCI, a state will have one vote. Maharashtra Cricket Club will not have a vote, or they'll be voting on rotation. This is nothing to do with the judiciary.
I blame Mr. Sibal, I blame you for this.
Why do you blame me for it?
Because he was appearing for the BCCI.
No, in a different avatar.
In a different avatar.
Because government shrank, the judges widened their jurisdiction.
I agree with you.
Correct, sir?
See, Parliament...
Second,
hold on. Where does that argument, why should the judges be deciding on BCCI? Where's the government shrinking there? Why are judges deciding on who should be appointed to BCCI?
If you invite the tiger to walk the streets, don't tell him who to devour.
I agree. Totally.
If the judges are asked, you direct, sir, whether the security forces should open fire in Ayodhya, I think the government has lost all moral right to complain about.
What has that got to do with the BCs? I don't understand what is one got to do with the other.
It's a habit. The judges then get used to deciding issues which are not judicial in nature. The appetite grows. The appetite to expand your own jurisdiction grows. It's a human failing. And that is exactly what has happened in some cases.
I'm reminded of what Thomas Jefferson once said.
Yes.
He said the Constitution is a mere thing like wax in the hands of judges. It can be molded any way they like. And these judges are also ordinary men. They have feet of clay. They're also given to power. They are given to taking positions.
And they all...
And this is the most dangerous thing. Because when a judge takes a position, he is infallible. It cannot be challenged. Because nobody is there to challenge it. When the executive takes a position, it can be challenged. When the legislature passes a law, it can be challenged. When a judge says no liquor will be served on a highway, you can't challenge it.
In fact, it's interesting you talk about judicial overreach and also talk about, in a sense, the appointments which are being made for judges after they retire. And I think Arghya's group has done a survey which shows in the last 10 years, Justice Sri Krishna, 80% of the judges who have retired from the Supreme Court have been given some sinecure by the government of the day.
Well, it's 70 and he's not one of them.
70%.
And he's not one of them.
70%, that's an unusual...
Let me tell you, 4 times the minister concerned had to persuade me to accept it. He said, if you do it, sir, that will solve me a problem. Why? I said, I said, first of all, let me start with the pay commission. I said, why on earth am I supposed to do? My talent as a judge has nothing to do with pay commission. He said, sir, if you take a view on this, nobody is going to question it. Therefore, please add the commission. When you come to Telangana, same argument. When you come to FSLRC, same argument. I said, it is your job. You and the Reserve Bank do it. He said, no, sir, I want you to be chairman so that all conflicts are balanced.
The other great danger is that judges now started using the Article 142 power. You see, for anything that they want to decide on, they use Article 142. In other words, it's not in the Constitution, but they will override a statute, they will pass an order.
Yeah, I come back to my closing point. This is what Justice Sri Krishna said. If the political system starts failing and you need the credibility of judges to carry controversial decisions, don't blame them for overreach.
I'm going to give you all therefore a micro moment at the very end. And this is linked to what we were discussing before we started. Harish Salve, if today you were asked, Mr. Salve, you're one of the best minds, finest legal minds in the country, will you be a judge? What would you say?
For various reasons, no.
You told me earlier that you would have become a judge if the salary was 10 times what it was today, and
Yes.
you were 10 years younger.
So I said various reasons.
Okay, those were the reasons. Mr. Sibal, would you venture to be a judge today?
Never.
Never.
Never. Never. I'm not I'm not mentally trained to be a judge.
You're
I'm
too-
mentally trained to fight for people,
I see.
not
okay.
to decide matters.
Arghya, would a young man like you want to be a judge in India today?
No judge is appointed till he has at least more grey hairs than one person can count. So even if I wanted to, I don't think I'd be eligible.
Justice Sri Krishna, would you want to be a judge in today's India?
So long as my mental and physical capacity remains as it is today, I'm willing to do it, and at no cost.
You're ready to be a judge at no cost even today. In fact, Justice Sri Krishna, very interestingly, when he left the Supreme Court, even offered to become a judge, an additional judge in the Bombay High Court at no cost. I don't know how many judges would even have agreed to do that. But there is a serious crisis, I think, which has been highlighted by these four gentlemen. I haven't gone into the controversial cases of the time, like the Kaliko Pool suicide case and a few other judgments that have come out in recent days. We can discuss those at another time. But gentlemen, you almost made me want to become a lawyer and not a journalist, which is what I really should have become.
Would you become a judge?
Sir, I was a lawyer for all of 3 months in the Bombay High Court.
You haven't answered his question.
You haven't answered the question.
I should have become...
Say yes or no. Say yes or no.
Given the power of journalism and what journalists are doing today, I'd rather become a journalist than a lawyer.
And if I had my way, I would get Justice Sri Krishna back in Supreme Court.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to all our four panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That session was indeed an eye-opener on the very complex relationship between the executive and judiciary. It was such a pleasure to hear all of you. I would like to call on stage Mr. Sundar Chainani, the chairman for Swiss Promotion. Please come on stage and kindly felicitate our guests who are present here. Thank you so much once again. Thank you.